I once thought I'd lost everything when I was humiliated and demoted in the very boardroom where I'd once commanded respect. The executives who orchestrated my downfall laughed as they stripped away my title, my team, my dignity. But from that crushing defeat, I learned to weaponize the same ruthless system that tried to destroy me. And when opportunity came knocking with a CEO position at a rival firm, those who had celebrated my fall would soon discover that revenge, served with corporate precision, tastes sweeter than any victory I'd ever imagined. My name is Madison Cole, and at 38, I had built a reputation as one of the most effective executives at Redwood Capital Group's Chicago headquarters. Numbers didn't lie in my world. My division had consistently delivered 20% growth year over year, outperforming every other unit in the company. I wasn't the type to play golf with the board members or laugh at their stale jokes over whiskey. I was there to work, to deliver results, and to push my team toward excellence. That Tuesday morning in November started like any other. I arrived at 7, reviewed the quarterly reports, and prepared for the executive meeting scheduled for 10. My assistant handed me coffee, black, no sugar, and I noticed her eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. Strange, but I brushed it off. I had bigger concerns than office gossip. The boardroom on the 42nd floor had always felt like my second home. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline, the kind of view that reminded you why you sacrificed weekends and relationships for this life. I took my usual seat, 3 chairs down from the head of the table, and opened my laptop. Thomas Hale entered 5 minutes before the meeting, his silver hair perfectly styled, his Armani suit impeccable as always. As Vice President of Operations, he commanded the room with the kind of artificial charm that made my skin crawl. He'd been with Redwood for 15 years, climbing the ladder not through talent, but through a masterful manipulation of office politics. Madison, he acknowledged me with that practiced smile that never reached his eyes. Glad you could join us. The phrasing struck me as odd. This was my meeting to run, the quarterly review of my division's performance. Why would he be glad I could join my own presentation? As the other executives filed in, I noticed the subtle shifts in body language. Mark from legal avoided my gaze. Sandra from HR clutched her folder tighter than usual. Even James, my longtime ally from strategic planning, seemed to find the conference table's wood grain fascinating. Thomas cleared his throat. Before we begin the quarterly review, we have an organizational update to discuss. My fingers stilled on the keyboard. This wasn't on the agenda. The board has been reviewing our structure, he continued, his voice smooth as aged bourbon. In these challenging times, we need to ensure maximum efficiency and alignment with corporate values. Alignment. That word was corporate speak for someone's about to get screwed. Madison. He turned to me, and I saw it then, the gleam of satisfaction he'd been trying to hide. Your division's numbers have been impressive. However, there have been concerns about your management style. My management style? I kept my voice level, professional, even as my pulse quickened. The style that's delivered the highest returns in the company? Numbers aren't everything, Thomas replied, shuffling papers he didn't need to read. Cultural fit, team morale, collaborative spirit. These intangibles matter. Several team members have expressed concerns about your aggressive approach. Aggressive? There it was. The word they always used when a woman refused to sugarcoat her feedback or apologize for her ambition. Who expressed these concerns? I asked, though I already knew he wouldn't answer. That's confidential, naturally. But after careful consideration, the board has decided to restructure, effective immediately. You'll be transitioning to a new role, senior analyst in the risk assessment department. The words hit like ice water. Senior analyst. 4 levels down from my current position. A desk job reviewing other people's work instead of leading my own team. It was designed to humiliate, to make me quit. You're demoting me. It wasn't a question. We prefer to call it a lateral move with adjusted responsibilities, Thomas said, his smile widening. Of course, this comes with a compensation adjustment as well. Around the table, no one would look at me. These people I'd worked with for 5 years, who'd celebrated my wins and relied on my expertise, sat silent as Thomas dismantled my career with corporate euphemisms. "And my team?" I asked. "Will be absorbed into Gerald's division. He's been eager to take on more responsibility." Gerald, Thomas's golf buddy who couldn't analyze a spreadsheet if his life depended on it. The piece clicked into place. This wasn't about my performance or management style. This was about Thomas consolidating power, removing anyone who might challenge his trajectory toward the CEO seat. When you say effective immediately, security will escort you to clear your office after this meeting. Your new desk is ready on the 12th floor. The 12th floor, where careers went to die. I closed my laptop slowly, deliberately, refusing to let them see my hands shake. 5 years of 70-hour weeks, of sacrificing everything for this company, reduced to a humiliating public execution in the boardroom where I'd once commanded respect. "I see," I said, standing. Every eye in the room suddenly found somewhere else to look. "Well then, I suppose there's nothing left to discuss." As I walked toward the door, Thomas's voice followed me. "Madison, we'll expect you at your new desk tomorrow morning, 8 sharp." I didn't turn around. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing what this had done to me. But as I left that boardroom, something cold and sharp crystallized in my chest. This wasn't over. Thomas Hale had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He just didn't know it yet. The 12th floor was corporate purgatory. Fluorescent lights hummed with a frequency that seemed designed to induce madness. My new desk, a gray cubicle wedged between the supply closet and the men's bathroom, was a deliberate insult. The nameplate read, M. Cole, Senior Analyst. A daily reminder of how far I'd fallen. My first morning, I arrived to find my computer password had been changed. It took 3 hours to fix it, during which I sat idle while former subordinates walked past, their eyes sliding over me like I was furniture. Karen, who I'd mentored for 2 years, actually stepped back when she saw me approaching the elevator, mumbling something about being late for a meeting. The work itself was mind-numbing, reviewing risk assessments that junior analysts had already vetted, rubber-stamping decisions I had no authority to influence. They'd given me the corporate equivalent of coloring inside the lines. My inbox, once flooded with strategic inquiries and urgent decisions, now contained IT newsletters and cafeteria menu updates. Lunch was the worst. The executive dining room on the 40th floor was now off-limits. Instead, I sat in the common cafeteria, watching clusters of employees whisper and glance my way. I heard fragments of their conversations. Total meltdown. Had it coming. Always thought she was too harsh. The narrative had already been written. Madison Cole, the cautionary tale of flying too close to the sun. By the 3rd week, even the pretense of productivity had vanished. My supervisor, a nervous 30-year-old named Brad who'd been with the company less than a year, would email me assignments, then apologize for wasting my time. We both knew I could do his job blindfolded, yet here I was, pretending to need his approval for reports that would be filed away unread. The nights were worse than the days. I'd return to my Lincoln Park apartment, pour a glass of wine that turned into a bottle, and stare at my phone. Professional contacts who'd once responded within minutes now took days to reply, if at all. My LinkedIn filled with congratulations for Gerald's exciting new role leading my former division. Each notification felt like another twist of the knife. Rachel, my best friend since business school, tried to maintain our Tuesday dinners, but the dynamic had shifted. She was still climbing her ladder at Goldman Sachs, and her attempts at empathy felt hollow. "Maybe it's a blessing in disguise," she offered over sushi. "You could start fresh somewhere else." "With what reference?" I shot back. "Everyone knows why executives get bumped to the 12th floor. It's corporate leprosy." She didn't argue. We both knew I was right. The humiliation came in waves. Discovering my corporate card had been downgraded. Being excluded from the strategic planning meetings I'd once led. Watching Gerald present my 5-year growth plan to the board. claiming credit for strategies I'd developed. But the worst was the pity. The security guard who offered sad smiles. The cafeteria worker who gave me extra portions like I was a charity case. The HR representative who left self-help books on my desk. I started arriving earlier, leaving later. Not because the work demanded it, but because the alternative was facing the emptiness of my life outside these walls. My identity had been so intertwined with my position that without it, I didn't know who I was. Madison Cole, Executive Vice President, had commanded respect. Madison Cole, Senior Analyst, was invisible. The isolation was deliberate and effective. Former allies distanced themselves, afraid the taint of my downfall might affect their own trajectories. Tom from Acquisitions, who'd once sought my counsel weekly, now took different elevators to avoid awkward encounters. Lisa from Marketing, who'd called me her role model, pretended to be on phone calls whenever our paths crossed. 6 weeks into my demotion, I overheard the conversation that nearly broke me. I was in the bathroom stall when Sandra from HR entered with someone from Thomas's team. "It's actually better now," the woman said. "Thomas runs things more smoothly. Madison was so intense." "Completely agree," Sandra replied. "Between you and me, the complaint letters about her were piling up. Thomas did everyone a favor." Complaint letters. I'd never received a single formal complaint in 5 years. The revision of history was complete. Not only had they destroyed my present, they were rewriting my past. That night, I sat in my apartment with my laptop open to a resignation letter. It would be so easy to disappear, to let them win. My savings could sustain me for a year, maybe 2. I could leave Chicago, start over somewhere where the Redwood Capital reputation didn't follow. But as I typed the words, something else stirred beneath the despair. Anger. Not the hot, reactive kind that makes you slam doors and send regrettable emails. This was different, cold, patient, crystallizing into something harder than mere rage. They thought they'd broken me. Thomas had orchestrated this humiliation thinking I'd slink away defeated. The board had signed off on it, confident I'd either quit or accept my neutered position. They'd all underestimated me. I deleted the resignation letter and opened a new document. At the top, I typed, "Thomas Hale, weaknesses." Then I began to write. Every observation from 5 years of meetings, every questionable decision, every alliance and rivalry, every skeleton I'd noticed rattling in Redwood's corporate closet. They'd made me invisible, irrelevant. They had no idea they'd actually given me the perfect vantage point to study them, to understand their weaknesses, to prepare. I wasn't broken. I was biding my time. 3 months into my exile on the 12th floor, I discovered the power of invisibility. When you're no longer a threat, people forget you're listening. They speak freely in elevators, leave confidential documents on printers, discuss sensitive matters in the break room while you're refilling your coffee. I became a ghost haunting Redwood Capital, absorbing everything. The first crack in Thomas's facade appeared during a budget meeting I wasn't supposed to attend. Brad had called in sick, and someone needed to deliver the risk assessment report. As I stood outside the conference room, waiting for my 3-minute slot, I heard Thomas through the door. "The Steinberg acquisition needs to close by quarter end," he was saying. "I don't care what corners we cut, Mark, make the legal issues disappear." Mark's response was muffled, but Thomas's next words were clear. "Then bury it in the subsidiary accounts. The auditors won't dig that deep." I delivered my report, invisible as wallpaper, while my mind raced. The Steinberg acquisition was a $50 million deal. If they were hiding legal issues and manipulating accounts, that was securities fraud, the kind that destroyed companies and sent executives to prison. I started paying attention differently, not with the bitter rage of the first weeks, but with the cold precision of a surgeon studying anatomy. Every interaction became intelligence. Every document that crossed my desk got scrutinized beyond the risk assessment I was supposed to rubber stamp. The pattern emerged slowly. Thomas wasn't just power-hungry, he was desperate. Redwood's stock had been sliding for 2 quarters. The board was getting restless. His path to CEO depended on showing dramatic growth, and he was manufacturing it through increasingly dangerous financial maneuvers. Gerald, my incompetent replacement, was the perfect puppet. Too stupid to understand what he was signing. Too arrogant to ask questions. I watched him present my strategies poorly. Watched the confusion in client meetings. Watched the numbers start to slip. My division's 20% growth dropped to 12, then 8. Thomas didn't care as long as the doctored reports showed profit. I began documenting everything. Not on company systems. I wasn't that naive. I used encrypted files on a personal laptop, building a meticulous case. Screenshots of emails accidentally left on printers. Photos of whiteboards from strategy sessions visible through glass doors. Recordings of conversations people had while I sat silent in my cubicle. Forgotten. The rage that had consumed me transformed into something more useful. Purpose. Every humiliation became fuel. Every slight sharpened my focus. They'd tried to break me, but instead they'd created something far more dangerous. Someone with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Week by week. I studied Thomas's empire. His alliance with Gerald was transactional. His relationship with the board was built on carefully managed perceptions. His team followed him out of fear, not loyalty. Every strength had a corresponding weakness. Every victory had left someone betrayed. I learned about his personal life, too. The affairs he thought were secret. The gambling debts he'd hidden through creative expense reports. The son he'd gotten into Northwestern through a generous donation that came from a supplier's kickback. Thomas Hale wasn't just corrupt. He was systematically criminal. But knowing wasn't enough. I needed leverage, and that meant thinking beyond Redwood Capital. That meant considering options I'd never imagined when I was comfortable in my executive suite. Late one night, researching Redwood's competitors for a risk assessment, I stumbled across an article about Sterling & Co. They were a smaller firm, aggressive, looking to expand into the Midwest market. Their current CEO was retiring. They needed someone who understood the Chicago financial landscape, someone with inside knowledge of how the major players operated, someone exactly like me. The thought was insane at first. Sterling was David to Redwood's Goliath. But David had won that fight, hadn't he? And I knew every weakness in Goliath's armor. I spent the next weeks researching Sterling obsessively. Their client list was solid but conservative. Their strategies were sound but unimaginative. They had capital but lacked the killer instinct to use it effectively. They were a loaded weapon waiting for someone with the will to pull the trigger. My cubicle on the 12th floor became my war room. While Brad apologetically assigned me meaningless tasks, I was mapping out how Sterling could systematically dismantle Redwood's client base. While former colleagues pretended I didn't exist, I was identifying which of Redwood's top performers were frustrated enough to jump ship. While Thomas celebrated his quarterly successes built on fraud, I was documenting every lie that would eventually destroy him. The Madison Cole who'd been demolished in that boardroom was gone. In her place sat someone harder, smarter, infinitely more dangerous. Someone who understood that in corporate warfare, the greatest advantage wasn't strength or position or even money. It was patience. Thomas thought he'd won. The board thought I was neutralized. Redwood Capital thought I was broken. They had no idea what was coming. I opened my personal laptop and began composing an email to Sterling's board of directors. The subject line was simple: your next CEO. It was time to rise from the ashes. But this time, I wouldn't be building a career. I'd be building a weapon. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, while I was reviewing another meaningless risk assessment. The number was blocked, but the voice was unmistakable. Eleanor Vance, the most ruthless headhunter in Chicago. When Eleanor called, careers either soared or ended. Madison Cole, she said, not a question, but a statement. I've been watching your situation at Redwood. I'm sure it's been entertaining, I replied, keeping my voice neutral despite my racing pulse. Quite the opposite. It's been illuminating. Tell me, are you free for coffee tomorrow? Somewhere discreet? We met at a small cafe in Wicker Park, far from the financial district's prying eyes. Eleanor was exactly as I remembered, silver-haired, sharp-suited, with eyes that missed nothing. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Sterling & Co. needs a new CEO, she said, sliding a folder across the table. They're hemorrhaging talent, losing market share, and about 6 months from being acquired by someone bigger. The board is desperate enough to consider unconventional candidates. And I'm unconventional because I'm currently reviewing junior analysts' homework. Eleanor smiled. You're unconventional because you know every vulnerability in Redwood's armor. Sterling doesn't need another traditional CEO. They need someone with a grudge and the intelligence to weaponize it. I opened the folder. Sterling's financials were worse than I'd thought, but not unsalvageable. They had strong fundamentals buried under weak leadership and outdated strategies. With the right moves, they could be transformed from a dying firm into a predator. The board will never approve someone who's been effectively demoted, I said. The board will approve someone who presents them with a detailed plan to triple their market cap in 3 years, Eleanor countered. Someone who can guarantee at least 5 major client acquisitions from their primary competitor. Someone who knows where the bodies are buried at Redwood Capital. The implications hung between us. This wasn't just a job offer. It was an invitation to corporate warfare. What makes you think I want revenge? I asked. Eleanor laughed. Madison, I've been in this business for 30 years. I know the difference between someone who's broken and someone who's planning. You've been planning. The question is whether you want to execute those plans from a cubicle on the 12th floor or from a CEO's office on Wall Street. Sterling's headquarters in New York, 300 miles from Chicago, but close enough to strike. Far enough to build power without Thomas seeing it coming. They want to meet me. Monday, unofficial. Of course, if it goes well, there will be formal interviews with the board. But Madison? She leaned forward. This isn't without risk. If Redwood finds out you're interviewing, they'll terminate you immediately. No severance, no references, and they'll do everything to sabotage your chances. I thought about my cubicle, about Brad's apologetic emails, about the 12th-floor purgatory I'd been sentenced to. What do I have to lose? Monday's flight to New York felt like a resurrection. I'd worn my best suit, the Armani I'd bought to celebrate my last promotion, before the fall. LaGuardia was bustling with the kind of energy I'd forgotten existed, the pulse of real business, real power. Sterling's offices occupied 3 floors of a building in Midtown Manhattan. Not the gleaming towers of major firms, but respectable, hungry. The receptionist greeted me by name. No judgment in her eyes about my current title. Eleanor had done her work well. The boardroom was smaller than Redwood's, but had the same spectacular view, this time of Manhattan's skyline. 5 board members sat around the table, their faces mixing skepticism with desperation. I recognized the chairman, William Sterling himself, 73 years old, watching his family's firm slowly die. Ms. Cole, he began, your resume is impressive, but your current position is the result of refusing to enable securities fraud, I interrupted, a calculated risk. I can provide documentation of systematic financial manipulation at Redwood Capital, the kind that will trigger SEC investigations within the year. The question isn't why I'm a senior analyst. It's whether you want someone with flexible ethics or someone who'll fight to build something legitimate. The room went silent. Then William Sterling smiled. Tell us about your vision for our firm. For the next 2 hours, I laid out everything. How Sterling could poach Redwood's best talent. I had a list of 20 names ready to jump. How we could undercut Redwood's client relationships. I knew every contract's weakness, every client's frustration. How we could position Sterling as the ethical alternative when Redwood's fraud inevitably exploded. You're talking about declaring war on one of Chicago's biggest firms, a board member said. No, I corrected. I'm talking about letting them destroy themselves while we pick up the pieces. Thomas Hale is building a house of cards. I'm offering to be the wind that knocks it down. When I finished, they asked me to wait outside. Through the glass doors, I watched them debate. William Sterling's voice rising occasionally above the others. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. Finally, Eleanor emerged, her expression unreadable. They want to see financial projections. Specific strategies. Proof you can deliver what you're promising. She paused. They're giving you 1 week to prepare a comprehensive presentation. If you convince them, the job is yours. 1 week to design the complete destruction of Thomas Hale's empire. I flew back to Chicago that night, returned to my cubicle Tuesday morning, and smiled at Brad when he apologetically assigned me another pointless task. He had no idea that while reviewing his risk assessments, I was architecting Redwood Capital's downfall. The weapon was no longer being built. It was being loaded, and in 1 week, I'd have my finger on the trigger. The email confirming my appointment as CEO of Sterling & Co. arrived while I was sitting in my cubicle, pretending to review Brad's latest apologetic assignment. I read it twice, then deleted it. No traces. Not yet. My resignation letter to Redwood was one sentence. Effective immediately. I resigned from my position. No explanation, no notice period, nothing that would give them time to react or interfere. I left it on Brad's desk at 6 p.m. on Friday, took nothing but my personal laptop, and walked out of Redwood Capital without looking back. Monday morning, I stood in Sterling's Manhattan headquarters as their new CEO. The announcement wouldn't go public for another week, enough time to prepare our first strike. William Sterling had given me carte blanche. Transform the firm or watch it die. He didn't care which enemies I made as long as Sterling survived. My first day, I called an all-hands meeting. 200 employees packed into the conference center, their faces mixing curiosity with concern. They'd heard rumors about the new CEO, the woman who'd been demoted at Redwood, now handed the keys to their struggling kingdom. Sterling & Co. has been dying slowly for 3 years. I began. No sugarcoating. Half of you are probably updating your resumes. The other half are too comfortable to realize you should be. That changes today. I outlined the transformation, aggressive expansion into Chicago, new trading strategies, and a complete overhaul of our client acquisition approach. But the real message was simpler. We were going to war. Some of you know my history with Redwood Capital, I continued. Let me be clear, I'm not here for petty revenge. I'm here because their weakness is our opportunity. When giants stumble, the hungry eat well. The energy shift was palpable. These people had been sleepwalking through decline. Now they sensed blood in the water. My first hire was Marcus Chen, Redwood's best analyst who Thomas had passed over for promotion 3 times. One phone call was all it took. Madison, I heard you disappeared. I did. Now I'm CEO at Sterling. I need a head of strategic planning. Interested? The silence lasted 5 seconds. When do I start? Within 2 weeks, I'd poached 6 key players from Redwood. Not the executives, they were too comfortable. I took the hungry ones, the overlooked talents, the brilliant minds Thomas had dismissed as not being cultural fits. Each defection was a precision cut, bleeding Redwood of its future while it celebrated its fraudulent present. The real coup came when Jennifer Walsh called. She'd been my lieutenant before the demotion, forced to report to Gerald's incompetence. He's destroying everything you built, she said. The clients are noticing. Morrison Industries is considering other options. Morrison Industries, a $500 million account I'd personally secured for Redwood. Their CEO, David Morrison, had always valued competence over politics. Set up a meeting, I told Jennifer. Quietly. I met David at his private club in Chicago. He looked older, tired of the corporate games. Madison, I heard about your situation. Ancient history. I'm running Sterling now. We're about to announce a new Chicago office. He raised an eyebrow. Sterling's moving into Redwood's territory? Sterling's offering an alternative. Redwood's performance has declined 18% since my departure. Their latest reports are creative fiction. How long before the SEC notices? David was too smart to miss the implication. You're saying Redwood has compliance issues? I'm saying Morrison Industries deserves a partner focused on legitimate growth, not quarterly theater. 3 days later, Morrison Industries announced they were exploring strategic alternatives to their Redwood partnership. The financial press buzzed with speculation. Redwood's stock dipped 2%. Thomas called my personal phone that night. I let it go to voicemail. Madison, it's Thomas. I heard about your new position. Congratulations. I hope we can maintain professional courtesy between our firms. Professional courtesy from the man who'd orchestrated my public humiliation. I deleted the message and called our PR team. Leaked to the Tribune that Sterling's Chicago office will open next month. Make sure they mention we're actively recruiting from established firms. The war had begun, but Thomas didn't understand the rules had changed. He was still playing politics while I was playing predator. Every decision I made was calculated for maximum damage. Sterling's new trading platform, designed to expose the latency issues in Redwood's system, our marketing campaign, highlighted transparent financial reporting and ethical leadership. Every word a dagger aimed at Thomas's fraudulent foundation. My office on the 38th floor had a telescope. Sometimes I'd aim it southwest, toward Chicago. Imagining Thomas in his boardroom, wondering why his numbers were sliding, why his people were leaving, why clients were asking uncomfortable questions. But the masterstroke was still coming. I'd hired a forensic accountant, someone who specialized in following money through corporate labyrinths. The Steinberg acquisition Thomas had pushed through, the one with buried legal issues and creative accounting, we'd found the trail. Shell companies, offshore accounts, a pattern of fraud that reached into 8 figures. When do we report this? My general counsel asked. Not yet. Let them climb higher before they fall. 6 weeks into my tenure, Sterling's stock had risen 15%. We'd secured 3 major clients from Redwood's portfolio. The financial press was calling it the Sterling Resurrection, with profiles of the controversial new CEO who'd transformed a dying firm into a rising star. Meanwhile, Redwood's board was asking questions. Gerald's incompetence was becoming impossible to hide. The SEC had started making preliminary inquiries about their reporting practices. Thomas was spending more time in closed-door meetings with legal than running the company. Eleanor called one evening as I reviewed Sterling's latest victories. "You've exceeded every expectation," she said. "The board is ecstatic. We're just getting started. Madison, be careful. Wounded animals are dangerous." She was right. Thomas would fight back eventually, but he still didn't understand the game had changed. He thought this was about business. He had no idea it was about annihilation. Thomas's counterattack came through the Wall Street Journal, a planted story about my erratic leadership at Redwood, complete with anonymous quotes from former colleagues describing me as difficult and vindictive. The article questioned whether Sterling's board had made a desperate gamble on damaged goods. I read it over morning coffee, almost admiring the effort. Thomas had pulled strings, called in favors, tried to wound me where it hurt. But he'd made a critical error. He'd gone public with the fight. Now I could respond without looking like the aggressor. Our PR team wanted to issue denials. I had a better idea. "Schedule a Bloomberg interview," I told them. "Live this afternoon." On camera, I was calm, professional, almost amused. It's interesting that anonymous sources at Redwood are so concerned about Sterling's leadership when their own stock has dropped 12% this quarter. Perhaps they should focus on their SEC inquiries rather than our success. The interviewer's eyes lit up. SEC inquiries. I'm sure Redwood will address those questions when appropriate. At Sterling, we're focused on transparent growth and serving our clients. I just turned Thomas's attack into a spotlight on Redwood's problems. Within hours, financial reporters were digging into the SEC story. Thomas had to issue 3 different statements trying to minimize the routine compliance review. Each denial made him look more guilty. But Thomas wasn't stupid. He knew I had inside information, and he started hunting for my sources. Jennifer called me, panicked. They're conducting internal investigations. Security is reviewing badge access logs, email histories. They know someone's been feeding you information. Are you safe? For now. But Madison, Gerald found something. He's been reviewing your old files, trying to understand your strategies. He stumbled onto the Steinberg folder. The Steinberg acquisition. If Gerald actually understood what he'd found, he'd realize it was evidence of Thomas's fraud. But Gerald was an idiot. He'd probably hand it straight to Thomas without recognizing its significance. Let him find it, I said. In fact, make sure he does. Are you insane? Gerald won't understand what he has, but Thomas will. And when he realizes that evidence exists, he'll panic. Panicked people make mistakes. I was right. Within days, Thomas started moving money, closing shell companies, destroying documents. Every action left digital footprints, created more evidence, expanded the crime from fraud to obstruction. My forensic accountant was having a field day tracking the cover-up. Meanwhile, Sterling's Chicago office opened with a launch party that made headlines. We'd leased 3 floors in the Aon Center, directly visible from Redwood's headquarters. Every morning, Thomas could look out his window and see our logo, a constant reminder of my presence. The client defections accelerated. Morrison Industries officially signed with Sterling, bringing their $500 million portfolio. 2 more major accounts followed within the week. Each departure triggered covenant reviews on Redwood's credit lines. Their CFO was scrambling to maintain liquidity. Then Marcus made a discovery that changed everything. I've been analyzing Redwood's trading patterns, he said, spreading documents across my desk. Thomas isn't just hiding fraud, he's been insider trading. Look. The evidence was damning. Trades executed minutes before major announcements, patterns that couldn't be coincidence. Thomas had been using client information to enrich himself personally. This is criminal, Marcus said. Federal criminal. How much? Over $30 million in illegal gains over 2 years. I stared at the papers, feeling the weight of the weapon in my hands. This wasn't just career ending. This was prison time. That night, Thomas called again. This time, I answered. We need to talk, he said without preamble. I'm listening. This has gone far enough. The market's big enough for both firms. We can coexist. Like we coexisted when you destroyed my career? Silence. Then, that was business, Madison. So is this. I know you have information, documents, things that could be misinterpreted. Misinterpreted. Even now, he couldn't admit guilt. What are you offering, Thomas? A truce. Sterling stays out of Chicago. We stop competing for the same clients. Everyone wins. And if I refuse, his voice hardened, I still have connections. Sterling's board might be interested to know about your mental state after the demotion, the drinking, the instability. I have witnesses. Lies, but he'd make them sound believable. For a moment, I considered backing down, taking the win I already had and walking away. Then I remembered sitting in that cubicle, the humiliation, the whispers, the systematic destruction of everything I'd built. Thomas, I said quietly, you should check your email. What? I just sent you something. A preview. I heard him typing, then a sharp intake of breath. I'd sent him 1 page of the insider trading evidence, just enough for him to understand what I had. You're making a mistake, he said. But the arrogance was gone, replaced by something I'd never heard from Thomas Hale. Fear. The mistake was yours, Thomas. You thought you'd broken me. You just taught me how to break you better. I hung up. The next morning, I had my general counsel contact the SEC. We've uncovered evidence of systematic fraud and insider trading at Redwood Capital during our due diligence on potential acquisitions. The war was entering its final phase, and Thomas had just learned he wasn't fighting for his company anymore. He was fighting for his freedom. The SEC moved faster than I'd anticipated. Within 48 hours of receiving our package, they'd frozen Redwood's accounts and seized documents. The FBI joined them, men in dark suits walking through Redwood's marble lobby while employees watched in shock. Someone filmed it on their phone. By lunch, the video had gone viral in financial circles. I watched from my office, the Bloomberg terminal displaying Redwood's stock price in real time, down 30% at the opening bell. Trading halted by noon. By close, It had lost 60% of its value. My phone rang constantly, reporters, analysts, competitors smelling blood. I ignored them all except one, David Morrison. My God, Madison, did you know how deep this went? I suspected. That's why Morrison Industries needed a new partner. You saved us from being collateral damage. We owe you. You owe Sterling. We protect our clients. The Wall Street Journal ran a different story now. Redwood Capital faces federal investigation, CEO Thomas Hale under criminal probe. The anonymous sources had disappeared, replaced by named prosecutors and documented evidence. The article mentioned Sterling's cooperation with authorities, positioning us as the ethical firm that exposed corruption. Thursday morning, Thomas's picture appeared on CNBC under the headline, "Disgraced Executive." He'd been arrested at his Lake Forest home at dawn, handcuffed in his driveway while neighbors watched. The perp walk was brutal. Thomas in yesterday's wrinkled suit, trying to hide his face from cameras, stripped of every ounce of his cultivated dignity. Gerald called me that afternoon, crying. "They think I knew," he sobbed. "The FBI questioned me for 6 hours. They're saying I signed off on fraudulent reports." "You did sign them, Gerald." "But I didn't know. Thomas said they were legitimate. You have to believe me." The man who'd stolen my division, who'd presented my work as his own, was begging for my help. "I believe you were too incompetent to understand what you were signing," I said. "Whether the FBI believes that is another matter. Please, Madison, you could tell them. Testify that I'm just stupid, not criminal." "Goodbye, Gerald." I hung up. An hour later, news broke that he'd been suspended pending investigation. By evening, he'd hired a criminal defense attorney. The Redwood board called an emergency meeting. Within 3 days, they'd fired Thomas, Gerald, and 6 other executives. The company was in free fall. Hemorrhaging clients and talent. They needed a buyer. And fast. William Sterling called me into his office. "How much of this did you orchestrate?" "I exposed existing crimes. Whatever happened after that was justice." He studied me for a long moment. "The board wants to acquire Redwood's remains, their client list, their infrastructure, pennies on the dollar. And they want to know if you can handle it, emotionally. Could I walk back into that building as owner, sit in the boardroom where I'd been humiliated, take possession of the empire Thomas had built on lies? When do we make the offer?" The acquisition negotiations took place in Redwood's conference room, the same one where I'd been demoted 11 months earlier. I sat in Thomas's former chair, across from Redwood's remaining board members. They looked exhausted, defeated, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage. "Sterling is prepared to offer $200 million for Redwood's assets," I said. The company had been worth $2 billion 6 months ago. "That's insulting," their chairman protested weakly. "It's generous, considering your liabilities. The lawsuits alone will take years to resolve. We're offering you an exit." They had no choice. Sign the deal or face bankruptcy and personal liability. One by one, they agreed. As we finalized details, Sandra from HR, the woman who'd laughed about my complaint letters, brought coffee. Her hands shook as she served me. "Ms. Cole," she whispered. "I'm sorry about before." I looked through her like she was glass. She fled the room. The signing ceremony was held in Redwood's atrium, with financial press in attendance. I stood at the podium where Thomas had once announced his victories, where he'd built his reputation on my work and others' silence. "Today marks not an ending, but a transformation," I announced. "Sterling & Co. will restore integrity to these assets, protect client interests, and build something worthy of trust." The cameras captured it all. Madison Cole, once demoted to the 12th floor, now owner of the entire building. That evening, I returned alone to the executive floor. The lights were off, the offices empty. I walked to Thomas's former office, stood behind his desk, looked out at the Chicago skyline he'd once ruled. On his wall hung his diplomas, his awards, his photos with politicians and CEOs. I left them all. monuments to a conquered king. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Thomas Hale indicted on 47 federal charges, faces 30 years in prison. I didn't smile. This wasn't about joy. It had never been about joy. It was about proving a simple truth. Those who destroy others should be prepared to be destroyed in return. And I was very, very good at destruction. The next morning, the Wall Street Journal ran a profile, Madison Cole's Masterclass in Corporate Revenge. They called it the most systematic dismantling of a corporate enemy in modern history. They had no idea it was also the most personal. The federal courthouse in Chicago was packed the day of Thomas's sentencing. I sat in the back row, watching the man who'd once ruled Redwood Capital shuffle to the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit. His silver hair had gone gray, his Armani confidence replaced by the hollow look of a broken man. 25 years. The judge delivered the sentence with clinical detachment: securities fraud, insider trading, obstruction of justice, conspiracy. Thomas didn't react. He'd already lost everything: his fortune seized, his reputation destroyed, his family absent from the courtroom. The empire he'd built through manipulation and lies had collapsed entirely, taking him with it. As they led him away, our eyes met for a brief moment. I saw recognition there, maybe even understanding. He'd created me, this version of me. The Madison Cole who'd walked into that boardroom a year ago would have felt sympathy. The one he'd forged in the fire of humiliation felt only cold satisfaction. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. "Ms. Cole, how does it feel to see Thomas Hale sentenced?" "Justice isn't about feelings," I replied. "It's about consequences." Back at Sterling's Chicago headquarters, the building that had once been Redwood Capital, I stood in what used to be the boardroom of my humiliation. We'd gutted it, rebuilt it, transformed it like everything else. The table where I'd been demoted was gone, replaced by one I'd chosen. The walls that had witnessed my destruction now displayed Sterling's victories. Jennifer knocked and entered. She was my chief operations officer now, running the division Gerald had destroyed. "The integration is complete," she reported. "Redwood's clients have all been successfully transferred. We're projecting 400% growth this quarter. And the employees? The ones worth keeping have been retained. The others?" She shrugged. "The market will sort them out. People like Sandra from HR, Brad from the 12th floor, all the anonymous sources who'd whispered about my downfall. They were gone. Not fired out of vengeance, simply deemed redundant in Sterling's efficient structure. The market, as Jennifer said, would sort them out." That evening, I sat alone in my office as the sun set over Chicago. The city lights began to twinkle, the same view Thomas had once enjoyed. On my desk sat a single photo from my time at Redwood, the day I'd been promoted to executive vice president, smiling, unaware of what was coming. I'd kept it as a reminder, not of the good times, but of the naivety, the belief that hard work and talent were enough, that the system was fair, that people like Thomas succeeded through merit rather than manipulation. Eleanor called as I was preparing to leave. "The board is beyond impressed," she said. "You've delivered everything you promised and more. They're talking about expanding internationally, making Sterling a global player, and they want to know if you're satisfied, if this concluded things for you." I looked at the photo on my desk, at the woman who'd believed in playing by the rules. "Satisfaction is a luxury I can't afford," I said. "There's always another Thomas Hale out there, another system that rewards corruption over competence. So this war continues. This war never ends. It just finds new battlefields." After hanging up, I walked through the empty offices. In the lobby, a new portrait hung. Madison Cole, CEO of Sterling & Co., the woman who'd risen from corporate death to destroy an empire. The employees who passed it each morning saw a success story, a comeback narrative, the American dream of resilience rewarded. They didn't see what I saw, a monument to the price of revenge. Every victory had cost something. Every enemy destroyed had taken a piece of the person I'd once been. The Madison who'd walked into Redwood 5 years ago, eager and optimistic, was as dead as Thomas's career. But that was the trade. You don't survive a corporate execution and remain unchanged. You don't orchestrate the systematic destruction of those who wronged you and keep your soul intact. You become something harder, colder, infinitely more dangerous. Standing in that lobby, looking at my portrait, I didn't smile. There was no joy in this victory, no warmth in this success. Just the icy satisfaction of a debt paid in full. A wrong corrected through calculated devastation. Thomas thought he'd broken me when he sent me to the 12th floor. He had. But from those broken pieces, I'd built something he never could have imagined. Not just a rival, but his executioner. The security guard nodded as I left. "Good evening, Ms. Cole." "Good evening, James." The same guard who'd once offered me pitying smiles when I'd been demoted. Now he stood straighter when I passed. Fear mixing with respect in his eyes. Everyone in the building knew the story. How Madison Cole had been destroyed and then destroyed her destroyer in return. They called it the greatest comeback in corporate history. I called it proof of a simple truth. In the world Thomas Hale had created, you were either predator or prey, and I would never be prey again. Walking out into the Chicago night, I felt the weight of what I'd become. Not regret. That was another luxury I couldn't afford. Just acknowledgement. Thomas Hale was in prison. Redwood Capital was mine. The revenge was complete. But revenge, I'd learned, doesn't fill the hollow spaces. It doesn't restore what was lost. It simply balances the scales with someone else's destruction. The valet brought my car, a black Mercedes, the kind of car that announced power without shouting it. As I drove away from the building that had once been my prison and was now my conquest, I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. Thank you for listening to this story of corporate revenge and redemption. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect with fellow listeners around the world. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Madison's position? Your perspectives make these stories richer for everyone.